Everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Transformation Leaders Podcast. I'm David Soden, joined by Sean Ennis, and today we have a special guest for you, and he is one of the subscribers / viewers of the podcast and the channel. And so we highly encourage you that if you're watching, just like Mark has here, that you can go ahead and fill out the form on our website at transformationleaderspodcast.com. Let us know what you have, how it kind of relates to what we've been talking about as with regards to transformation and leadership and AI and everything in between. But today we're joined by Mark Ryer, and he is the executive leader who designs and establishes systems, processes, and tools mainly to drive transformation for industry-leading multinational corporations. He's pioneered complex enterprise initiatives over $1 billion that align executive, people, products, and strategy across HR programs and business units, which enable growth in a highly competitive and rapidly evolving industry. And today, we're specifically focused on what leadership needs to do now as it relates to human experience of AI. And he's got a presentation here that he's going to walk us through. And Mark, if you're okay, I'll go ahead and I'll turn this over to you and kind of walk us through a little bit about what you do, and we'll start there.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I think the introduction was great, and thank you very much for that. I'm really happy to be here today. And as you said with that, my role is within Change Fusion, as we're a small boutique consulting firm, is to really help organizations think through and be a little bit more mindful and intentional of some of their large transformation efforts from that standpoint. So I've got, and we've got a range of clients that are both federal, state, and corporations, financial, manufacturing within that space. And really, I think one of the, just to be clear, we're not a technology support type of organization, although I've spent most of my time within technology. The challenge that we see with AI is not so much that it's, a technology upgrade, which it is, but there's a shift in the way that leaders need to approach this. There's a shift in the way that organizations need to think about their employees and how they work together. So, I think as we go, I've got a few slides here just to kind of help frame the conversation, but, I'd like for us to kind of have some discussion about them. I think the biggest thing here, especially for those of you and for those that are listening that have led transformation in the past within the space of technology, there seems to be some familiar space here. When I remember when Agile was first kind of coming up, Agile transformation in technology. And I just think about it. I think about the leaders that were like, agile. We need to be more agile. Everything needs to be agile. But then when you really cut down to it and said, what exactly does that mean? Nobody had a shared understanding, and nobody fully got what it was. And to a degree, that was even the digital transformation. Brick and mortar is never going to, everything's going away, and absolutely things shifted, but not in exactly the same way that people expected it. So I think from a standpoint of familiarity with AI, there's a lot of this hype that's kind of out there, and this FOMO, right? Fear of missing out, as organizations kind of drive to that. And so I think what that generally tends to do is the leaders and organizations are just kind of jumping in without a plan per se, because they've got the sense of urgency and they've got the hype, but there's not a lot of clarity on what to do. So I think it's very reminiscent of kind of Agile and other digital transformation efforts that were out there. I think what's different is everybody understands. Like if you talked about agile transformation to a business person outside of technology, they might have been, well, I have no idea what that means, right? Or cloud adoption, or those types of things. But now everyone knows AI. It is all over the place, so it's exponentially larger. And so this scope and span is very different. And I also think, to some degree, the pace of change. I know we always say it, and it's cliche. The pace of change is advancing so much, but it's to this point of where it's really kind of cycling fast. Even if you just think about AI, a year and a half ago compared to AI now and what it can do, it's drastically changed. I guess I'd kind of ask you, are you seeing these types of familiarity patterns and kind of the differences with the different people that you're working with?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's one of the things that we've been talking about for quite some time is that this is the same story with different words. Transformation is the common denominator, how to create change and enforce change. And one of the things that I think that is so interesting about what you all do is around a lot of people like to talk about the technology, and they're so enamored by the technology, and when they fail, they blame the technology.
Yeah.
And if anybody who's listening today has heard me on the air, off the air, I say the same thing. It is people, process, and tools that make a business solution in that order. And your focus is really on the people side of AI change, which I think is an underserved, underappreciated segment of the digital transformation process with AI.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And so I think a lot of times you'll get people that'll implement technology and the workforce isn't ready and leadership is just being pushed by the industry with no real plan. And that is where I see a lot of what you bring to the table and what you offer. You start, more importantly, with the leadership, so that by the time the workforce is enabled with AI or whatever the plan may be for them, you've already worked it through and worked it out with leadership so that there's a clear direction from the top down. And that, I think, is a real game changer, because a lot of people are out there. If you take everybody that's adopting AI or struggling to get to AI, they definitely need your services first, then come in and figure out, hey, what tech am I going to use? And all of the other propeller geeky head stuff that Sean and I love to talk about on most of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what I'm seeing as far as individuals that I'm chatting with or working with is that AI, there are pockets within an organization of people who are thinking about it and driving it, and then but they're siloed, right? And they're not really kind of working together, and there's no kind of guardrails, kind of philosophy of how they want to use it from that standpoint. So, we're seeing teams that will appoint somebody that's over AI, but one aspect of it, like what I've seen in a few organizations, is data analytics. That's where AI is kind of coming into easy, kind of, it's an easy match. But data and analytics is just one aspect of what AI can do, right? And how it can shift. The other is kind of workplace technology and how AI can help with that. And so we're seeing a lot of that. But again, there's still, where's that broader plan? And then without that broader plan, it kind of begins to things can tend to go off the rails a little bit.
I got a question for you, if you don't mind. So I see the title of your slide. We've been here before, and Sean and I notoriously love to say, the more things change, the more things stay the same. And as we go through and we implement AI, and you brought up data analytics, one of the things that Sean and I constantly talk about is fix your data. Don't try to implement AI on bad, dirty data. It's always about, 4 steps backwards and then try to go 1 step forward. But they keep kicking the can down the road with each new technological evolution. So that data never really does get fixed. How, and what you do, how often do you see that, and how do you handle that? And more importantly, usually the people closest to the data are the ones that know about it, and maybe 1 or 2 layers up. But in a large enterprise, Fortune 100, say, style company, you get into leadership and they're either oblivious, or if they know, they don't necessarily have a strong appreciation for how bad it really might be. How do you work around or through those types of problems with leadership? I'm really curious, because I struggle myself when I'm having these conversations.
Yeah, and I'm smiling just because I run across that all the time. It is a constant, even in my space. And because I kind of have a foot in the technology and a foot in kind of OD, organizational development, or people side, I go back to what Sean, you said, which is it's people, process, and technology. And it's the whole garbage in, garbage out, right? Things. And part of, I think, AI's promise is so alluring, they skip the people in the process. And so then you just have an overlay over a broken kind of fundamentals, and it's not quite there where it can fix that yet. And to your point, then that just breeds, well, this is dumb. It can't really do anything. How's it really going to help the organization? So what we try to do in that space is get people to think more in a system component, or system thinking from there. So, as we kind of, shift to this, right? And right in line with this is, the tools are easy, right? To a degree, right? That's the easy part. Which one are we going to use? How are we going to evaluate it? But systems are hard, right? So they don't work in isolation. There's upstream, there's downstream, right? And I think sometimes when we are looking at AI in particular, we think about a specific problem, but we don't think about it as how is that going to shift the system? And then what's really, from our process points, there are, especially in the US, our culture is very results driven, right? So if we hire somebody, they should be doing X, Y, and Z, but we kind of miss the intangible, right, from that. So what we try to do with the leadership and thought leaders in this space is to ensure that they're thinking holistically about the system, right? Because if their thinking is shallow, right, that is going to create more risk than the AI technology in and of itself. So as an example, and I've got consider this call out here. One of the things that I'm seeing is this idea of, well, we can use AI for kiosks, and that enables us to get rid of frontline employees, customer service employees, as an example, right? Because then they can just go to the kiosk. But a kiosk is not going to judge the room. A kiosk is not going to instill faith with a customer, right? That they're going to be treated well. So it can remove trust from the system and the interaction within that space. So that's part of why I think the work that we are doing with organizations is important, is because it's kind of to a degree, a risk management, right? In the sense of think before you begin to push this, or else you can kind of run off course, per se, from that standpoint.
Is there a conversation that you have with prospective clients and even current clients around when you roll this out to them, how do they roll out AI and not lose their humanity in the process? And by that, I mean, and Sean said this, you confirmed this, people process and technology, essentially. The key to me is trying to convince or talk leadership off the ledge where they want to destroy or remove the humanity or the human component. It doesn't necessarily have to be a human in the loop that I'm referring to.
Right.
I think personally, AI is great at automation, great at processes, great at taking tasks to scale. So if you have a lot of monotonous things, say, for example, in BFSI, where you're either insurance or finance, there's so much rules, regulations, and paperwork. It's monotonous, mundane. AI is great at accelerating those, but focus on building the company on its relationships, on its people, on its whatever. And so, if they try to get rid of the people on the CX side of things and they just push, self-serve kiosks, as you said, then they're losing their competitive edge, because a lot of their competitors try to kill off people to send them to kiosks and automated things. The company that keeps humanity is the one that's going to win ultimately in the end, because nobody wants to deal with AI 100%.
Right. Yeah. And it's that balance within it. And I would say that most leaders, I think the number one thing that they can do is create a shared understanding within their organization around what the promise of AI is for their organization and how they want to begin to use it and think about it in that way holistically. Customer experience, employee experience, right? Their industry and their space within it from that standpoint. So for me, an answer to your question, I think, with leaders, the number one is what is the plan? What is the approach, right? That you're going to look at this, because I think to some degree, and what we're seeing is there's a lot of anxiety around what AI is and what AI isn't, how it's going to shift things to a degree, right? When we think about the reactions that people are having to AI, there's this, just everyone's kind of, anxiety may be too strong of a word, but just everyone's at least questioning what it is, right? To a degree. Even, part of our organization, as an example, transparently does training, right? We do a lot of training, leadership training, employee training, and those types of things. Will AI take us out of that space eventually from that standpoint, and relegate us to coaching to a degree? Who knows where that will shift, right? So there's anxiety that's out there, people kind of questioning, how long will I, have a role? What will this look like? How will it shift? I think leaders have this pressure then, because there's definitely, and we've seen this with our clients that we're working with, there is pressure for them to kind of know the answer of what they're doing. And then obviously the employee concerns as far as, is my job going to be relevant? And all of this kind of comes up as like mixed resistance signals. So it's not necessarily outright, rebellion per se, but it's hesitation, it's confusion, it's head in the sand types of behaviors from there. So that's kind of the patterns that we see. So a lot of what we try to do, and this is classic change management, is what is the narrative, right? What is the change narrative? What is the story, so that people can kind of begin to absorb it and understand that?
I mean, my whole thing, and I've had this conversation so many times, and I've not had this conversation so many times, because when you start talking to people, and literally you could tell they're grasping at straws, trying to justify not using AI because they see it as a threat. You know,
Yeah.
I talk to people and they're like, Sean, why is this so hard? And I'm like, you are literally asking many people, like turkeys voting for Thanksgiving, right? People see themselves as my job is going to be at threat. I'm not going to say this outwardly. How do you get people to pull back from that self-preservation instinct we all have? You know, um, most people, I'd like to say, enjoy their job. And when this stuff comes around, you call it anxiety, but there's that self-preservation, this automatic reflex against change. This is something we've seen it before. What are some of the strategies that you see that is helpful for people to try to get people to put down their knives?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think at a meta level, right, that type of reaction, which is completely normal and should be expected, right, if anything, and going back to what we talked about with, the patterns, right, it was the same thing with agile, right? If you think about agile transformation, and for those that are not as familiar with agile transformation in the software development space, there were specific roles that go away, right? Their project managers go away, business analysts go away, right? Release chain release chain stays, but the release management shifts, right? And people that were in those roles were just like, no, there'll always be a need for us. We always need to have a requirements document. We always need to have, and so it was this kind of head in the sand component. And the biggest thing that I found in that example was a roadmap and an understanding. Individuals need to understand, what is it that we are in now and what are we going to? What's the from to? And then begin to do translation work into, all right, what does this mean for me, right? So I think the first step organizationally is the organization needs to get their act together, and kind of, to a degree, leaders need to circle the wagons, right, and understand what is it and what is the approach to a degree. And circle the wagons sounds exclusionary, but the idea is, if you've got a large organization or even a mid-sized organization, the leaders need to come up with at least a high-level framework and plan. They don't need to have all the answers for that. And then the conversations need to be around, what is the opportunity, what are we coming from, and what are we looking to get to? And then I think A, the story is straight, B, the clarity about the from to, and then C, how do we engage those individuals to put the knives away, per se, right? How do we engage them in the story of co-creating what that future is going to look like, right? So it's not so much that your role is going to disappear. It may be more that how you do your role is going to shift with AI. So instead of doing this and this and this, you're going to be doing this and this and this, right? So, and walking through examples. Because I think one of the things that AI, for anybody that's used AI, it does begin to shift how you work and of how you get things done and your productivity.
What do you, so if you look at the second phase or part of that, let's just say you've gone through phase one, leadership is completely bought in, they're on board, they got a plan, everything's good to go. However, even if they have a plan about how to message and communicate proactively to the employees to mitigate those concerns up front, how are you coaching them to monitor or get in front of or listen to water cooler talk, or I don't know. There's probably any number of ways, I guess. But, user uptake is a problem just generating and rolling out a replacement. Say, for example, they're on some kludgy system that they had when they were a mom and pop, and it's stuck forever. But now they're approaching enterprise level, and they've got to transition to Workday. But there's resistance because nobody wants to use it because everybody knows how to use that old kludgy system. And that's hard. That's traditional old school problems. And now you've got all of that plus, oh my God, it's AI. It's going to come take my job away. And just to your point, my role's going to change, but I don't like change. Change is a 4-letter word in my vocabulary, but the way I spell it. So I don't want to lose my job. I'm not going to offer any help. I'm not going to do any resistance. And I love your last point because that leads to silence resistance. It's quiet quitting. It's I'm just going to shut down and I'm not going to say anything. So I am interested to kind of hear how your firm deals with that next big challenge, because that's ultimately going to lead to the success or failure of whatever it is they're trying to do.
Yeah. And I think, when we look at leaders or when we look at organizations that are trying to make that shift, I think, going back to, the processes that are in place, right? There's aspects that just need to be consistently reinforced. I think one of the value points, one of many, but one of the key values that we bring to organizations is we're the outside voice, right? We're the kind of the Jiminy Cricket per se of the conscience, that's kind of saying things that might not be able to be said. So like case in point, working with an organization that's looking to do a lot of scaling, right? And so they know they need to shift away from this hero mentality of this individual is going to save the day and do it. And so what that means, though, is we need to have some process documented, and we need to have make it repeatable and sustainable so we can improve efficiency and scale. But then as soon as you put in a process, it's like, oh no, that's too much. It's too, and so they react to that. So this is where kind of in this phase, you've got to really work to kind of model that behavior and consistently provide that kind of that framework of that those guardrails per se within it. So, I think often what we try to do is once you've got your story kind of nailed down and the narrative and the approach, it's then, okay, how do we bring this to life for that? And so this is where we tend to work with the next echelon of leaders down, right? So it's not the C-suite, maybe they're directs, but depending on the size, but it's that next layer. And that's where they need to kind of come in and make it real. And the things that we try to do with them is to get them to think in terms of systems, right? So, from that standpoint, thinking through how do they look at their organization, their function, what's that process? They themselves need to be modeling the learning that they're doing. I know I'm going out of order what's on the screen, but just thinking from the standpoint of, it's kind of we need to adopt this, but do as I say, not as I do, right? Type of thing. And so the leader should be modeling that aspect of how are they learning? How are they using AI? What has shifted for their experience, right? But then number 2 is probably the biggest one with any change effort that I see or transformation, which is that the leaders need to dedicate time to their people to help them through this process, right? So this is where doing the translation work, here's the big picture. What does that mean for my function and our function and the roles within here? And let's talk about it within the team. So if you're not talking about the changes that AI may bring to the team, with your team, then you're doing it at your own peril, right? Because then that's where the silence resistance comes up. So, and I forget which, either Sean or you, David, mentioned this idea of getting input back up the chain. This is how that happens, right? By engaging in conversation with the employees, with the staff, and understanding what are the concerns, what are the issues, right? And it could just be, oh, we need to, that's not at all what we're intending, so we need to update our messaging to make sure we're clear. Or, these are the opportunities that we might be missing in this space from that. Because part of it, what you're trying to generate, I mean, the ideal with any transformation, and specifically with AI, is that you've got an army of people that are looking at the situation and trying to figure out how they can make it better. And with guidelines and a framework, so that it's not pockets of doing things better, but it becomes kind of spread across the organization.
Well, I mean, one of the strategies that I've heard that really energized me was, I know Meta, what they do is they make it part of your quarterly bonus review. So every 3 months, you need to describe and document, provide data on the AI tools that you're using and the value it's providing, and then you get a bonus for that. And then they take all that data and they roll it up, and then they create default documentation, default tools, default knowledge bases to distribute that knowledge. They're bringing the lower class in to the value chain, right? You will get more money if you use this, right? It will make your job easier. It will make money. I say this all the time. You complain about the behavior to me, and I will tell you the incentive, right?
Right.
Because most likely, if you have a certain behavior, there is a fiscal or a corporate or a operational incentive for that behavior.
Yeah. Absolutely, 100% agree. Things are entrenched because they are supported, right? It's either a mental model or there's some type of perceived value for keeping it that way, right? Yeah.
And what I hear all the time is from the lower level people, when they're willing to talk about it, your silence resistance, they just don't see the incentive. Like, okay, back to my turkeys and Thanksgiving comment. Like, you're asking me to risk my job. What's in it for me? And once we get beyond the niceties, everybody's nice to each other. Everybody, doesn't want to hurt people's feelings. Nobody wants to get in trouble. So,
right.
The nebulous nature of this problem is, I think, the majority of the failure of AI is you are forgetting that process matters, people matter, incentives and behaviors matter. And, I know David talks about data. I mean, my perspective is data isn't even the top 5 things that I worry about with AI. Because, people are what matters. I tell this all the time to my direct reports, to my peers. A company is people, right? AI is just technology. It can be replaced. People don't go to work for a company and answer to an AI overlord yet. Again, I don't believe any Fortune 500 board would appoint an AI to run things. Everybody wants to throw a joke. So you all have jobs. The question is do we have too many in this role? And one of the other things in our daytime job, me and David, we tell customers all the time, the demand for help is inexhaustible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one will ever say, you know what? I don't think we can do better.
Yeah. And I think as people, again, from the human side of it, people begin to wrap their head around what does this mean for them. It begins to shift. I'll give a personal example. The first time I started using AI, there was a complex engagement I was working on, and it was a lot of data analysis that I needed to do from there. And so I used AI to help kind of trend it. Of course, you still have to give your expertise eye and validate and all of that. But I felt, oh, wow, there were a few things that it saw that I didn't see. There are a few things that I saw that it didn't see. But at the end of the day, it ended up being a really nice end product. But I had this tinge of like, ooh, I shouldn't say that I used AI for this, will people think, well, then why did we pay you, right? To a degree from that standpoint. And I think that's out there, especially for knowledge workers who are in kind of white collar roles right now, are in that space, because the idea of there's this double-edged sword of, I want to use AI, but I also want to not use AI and make myself, obsolete to a degree, right? Which I think, Sean, is what you were kind of alluding to within that space. So I think that's where what I think is slowly shifting, at least in the landscape within employees, is that it's no longer the exception. It's the rule that people should be using AI. And I think there's been a few, Gartner and McKinsey and Microsoft has been doing kind of just polling and kind of understanding the trends and usage of AI. And as of right now, I think it's somewhere just north of 75% of knowledge workers are using AI, right? And so I think as that begins to shift, this idea of connecting and using AI comes out from the shadows and is more, okay, this is the expectation to a degree,
Mark, that reminds me of a story that I remember reading on the internet or on a YouTube. I saw it, and it's very foggy and fuzzy, so I'll try to bring the gist of it. But when you were saying that, I'm thinking, when you're trying to justify whether or not to tell people you've used AI and feel slightly embarrassed, one of the things I tell people, it's knowing what questions to ask, because you're the subject matter expert. You just need to use AI to do the heavy lifting. And so going back to this thing that I heard online, the story goes about a guy that fixes or repairs a ship, like I don't know if it's a tanker or something, but guy's got a wrench, shows up. Everybody has tried to fix this stupid thing. They spent tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And anyway, this one guy comes in and he takes his wrench and starts banging around and knocking on the different things. And all of a sudden, boom, he hits the one thing. He says, okay, everything's fixed. And they try it, and magically it was there. And then he sends in an invoice for like 20, 50, I don't know, some ridiculous amount of money. And there was resistance to pay that invoice. And he's like, look, you're not paying me for the time that I spent knocking, because that's not what I'm providing you. This is value-based billing. I knew exactly where to knock. You're paying me to know where to knock, not the effort to do the knocking. And so that's kind of the value on AI, that AI can create really quick work of it, but it's really bad at hallucination. And so if you don't know your expectations of what questions to ask, how to analyze the data. And I'm sure that even if you have customers in the same industry, say a retail industry, Walmart, Kmart, Anymart, and analyzing their sales data for whatever, that data analysis is similar, but based on how that data unfolds, the metadata, the metrics, you're going to ask different questions. AI doesn't know that. It doesn't know how to look at that from a perspective lens. and then finishing that up, saying, now it has your context of what questions to ask. If you wrap it up and just say, what have I missed? What other operational insights are to this industry? Or this is the client. What other questions should we be looking at? What is in the data that we're not seeing? And short-term, long-term, and just asking these, like, we never had the ability to ask these type of questions. We never had the time or the people, the resources to go through that. And so I think, approaching problems and solving it and justifying it with explanations, to me, that just kind of is where we're at today, and how to explain it and work and get that value out of what it is that we're trying to do. Like, people just need that mental shift.
Yes, 100%. Because it's almost like apologizing for, doing a budget with a calculator, or Excel, right? It's like, to a degree. And I think this type of conversation is an example of the people side of helping people kind of wrap their heads around the use, what it is, what it isn't from there. And it's funny that analogy that you used of the person coming to fix the boiler, right? I know I've heard that many times, and we use something akin to that in our we have a training program for employees that we offer as part of a suite of like that, and that's right up in line with it, right? It's the idea that it is a tool you're using, but you need to have still your component of your area of expertise to frame it, right? For leaders, as far as tactically, we often say think of AI, especially if you're using it, day to day, as a thought partner to help. But sometimes that thought partner is drunk, and so you've got to make sure that what they're saying is right and real, and we've seen that kind of come up. So that's part of like the idea of even what's on the screen right now, as far as the slide, model that learning. I think if leaders can kind of talk through, I tried this, I did that, I worked through this, or, in analyzing this, I discovered 2 things that I had missed, but it was only because AI didn't necessarily do it. It's just because it raised the level of transparency into the data set to a degree. Those are types of things that help the employees kind of digest this and make it through for themselves, right?
Yeah, another analogy I use when people are afraid to kind of leverage or use AI is talking about Tesla and their self-driving cars. I'm like, how comfortable do you feel getting behind a Tesla, having it drive you from your, origins to your destination, and have the full confidence to just take a nap behind the driver's seat, mind you, and just say AI is going to handle the whole thing? How much do you trust that? And so when leadership wants to implement AI for the purposes of reducing headcount, I use that quick analogy, and the light seems to click real quick.
Yeah, I agree for sure. So I guess, as you're thinking through kind of those trends within it, what do you, I'm just curious to, from both of you, what do you see as the if you had to really nail it down, the biggest opportunity and the biggest risk in your kind of thinking for AI?
Sean, you go ahead. You take the first stab at this, because I got an idea.
Yeah, I mean, so the opportunity is to make everybody's job easier and more rewarding. The opportunity is to align the human spirit to the work that needs to be done, and that everybody gets to have a career instead of a job. A job is what you have to pay the bills. A career is what gives you fulfillment. AI has that capability of enabling you to do the things that you don't want to do with as little effort as possible. The risk is that people are going to enjoy the monotony. I know I don't. The people I talk to, they say they don't, but AI is only really good for the monotony. So if you have a problem with AI, you need to ask yourself, what is your bliss? Right? And that's kind of the conversation I have with people. So that's my answer.
Yeah.
Mine's a little bit more with the assumption, or taking the safe assumption, that somebody like Mark has already been coming in before us, and everything's all well and good and pie and sky and peaches and cream. It's all well. But now we're to the implementation point. And so I see where everything is falling apart at the seams. I see where budgets are running away, with money being spent by the billions across the world by multiple companies. And at the end of the day, AI not being as successful as it could be. And the real opportunity is on the implementation side. And this is where, like you guys, partnering with people that have the foresight, the experience, the knowledge. As I had mentioned in your introduction, I mean, you've been involved in $1 billion plus. And so this lends to the experience. And Sean and I have been working with a lot of Fortune 100, 500 companies globally, and a lot of big names there too. So we've seen a lot of this. And so this is where I've had the opportunity of seeing what went wrong last year, how things got started in 2024, before they really ramped up last year. And it really comes down to this idea of RAG, and that's the retrieval augmented generation. And this is where you bring in documents or knowledge to supplement the large language model from what it knows. The problem is that I've seen is that people are loading up all of this data, but this data isn't properly tagged with what's called metadata, or even tags. And so when they try to do a correlational analysis or correlational threading by having the AI intelligently be able to do that, the technology that exists today in order to be able to do that is super, super expensive, of hundreds of thousands of dollars a month to run this. And these graph RAG systems. They produce the correlational analysis behind the scenes, but you can do a poor man's version of it using traditional RAG by simply adding metadata. I wrote an article on LinkedIn, so if anybody's even remotely interested in this, they can go look at my profile and go see that article. But it talks about the strategy of when you're doing traditional RAG, just go that extra step. And when you ingest information into that RAG system, classify, identify, and look for correlations, so that things are not just done at inference or at runtime. It is consistently updated every time you update the knowledge base. It essentially goes back and only updates those pieces of information where there is correlation. So it knows how to do that. You get all the benefits of low-cost RAG at that high performance, high scalability of those graph RAG systems. And so it really comes down to the implementation. That's the opportunity that's missed. People are just spending way too much money. They don't need to spend that much money to get to the output and the effectiveness that they're looking for on the technological side of things. But that me and my little propeller head going off.
Yeah, no. One of the risks that I always think about with it, to start with, that is right in line with what you're talking about, which is there's so much that in theory could come out of these models that it's overwhelming, right? It's overwhelming to make sense of it, and to putting myself in a leadership role of a Fortune 100, and that much data. What do I do with this? And even just at a personal use, sometimes you'll say, "Hey, I have a question," in ChatGPT or whatever, and you get this long thing, and you're like, whoa, chunk this out. So I think to some degree, the idea of having those tags and the correlation, and that gives you the ability to summarize, right? That gives you the ability to focus a little bit more, because to some degree, I think AI, it's going to contribute to, attention deficit, disorder. There's going to be so much, out there, right, from that standpoint. So I definitely resonates with me what you're saying, because I think that just overwhelms people sometimes.
And I think people also make the mistake when they think Fortune 100, 500, or enterprise that, the assumption is, oh, surely these companies have X system, one system to do this one feature. That is not the case. There's mergers, acquisitions, there's fragmentation, legacy systems at scale times 10, like 10 PeopleSoft systems, 10 whatever, or fragments of that. And so when we say unstructured data, people really have no appreciation for what that really means. That means 10 systems of whatever, and then SharePoint, Lotus Notes, whatever the heck they had floating around from the 80s, the 90s, still kicking out there. It's crazy.
Yeah. Excel, right? The number of Fortune 100 companies that have a massive amount of data sitting in Excel still to this day, right? That's just there, right? From that standpoint. So,
very true.
As I think about that, part of what we try to do then is, we really want to kind of get the organization and get leaders kind of thinking about this transformation. We want to, it's this idea of intentional, mindful, right, to a degree, to what are going to be the priorities, what are the governance we want to put in place, right? And then thinking about, all right, now that we have some sense of what and where we're going to focus, then the how, right? The adoption strategies within that. And I think a lot of it is just the confidence, right? That AI can solve problems and they are going to be a part of it. I think that's, the component. I think if I were to have one tagline for this entire, piece, it would be leaders need to take a mindful approach to this transformation. And obviously that's with any, but with AI, it's so wild and unpredictable to a degree, and it's so varied. Leaders really should be looking at their organization and figuring out, what is our plan. Again, I know it's super rudimentary, but it's just not, sometimes it's just, it's not there. It just doesn't happen. So, I have just here, if anybody wants to connect with us with regard to, some of the work that we do, from that standpoint, I think, so I'll leave that up for a little bit, but I guess, as you guys kind of think through or thinking about kind of AI and the risks and the opportunities that are there, what just in general, how have you seen kind of organizations really succeeding in this? Like where they're really kind of doing a good job and kind of moving ahead? You mentioned Meta, right? With the idea of kind of embedding that into its performance process. Have you seen other organizations really kind of doing a good job of this?
Most are not, some yes.
Again, I think there's so much strategic opportunity / threat that a lot of people are ham-fisting this transformation.
Yeah.
There are some that it is coming from the board level. You must do, and there's very little time. A lot of people were caught unaware how much this was going to be impactful. So they are rushing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the flip side, which is not only are there turkeys at the lower level, there are turkeys up at the higher level who feel like it's Thanksgiving for them too.
Yeah.
That, hey, I'm a VP, I've got 5,000 reports underneath my structure, and if AI reduces that by 50%, am I a VP anymore? Right? those kind of things I'm seeing happening. When I heard what Meta is doing, that solves a lot of strategic data incentives of data collection. One of the biggest disappointments I have with the technology today is that they do a very poor job of understanding what value you're actually getting from AI. And that is a limiting force on how much AI can be used, is how much AI is generating value.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, I put the Change Fusion website up there for you guys to be able to see in addition to the QR code, except let me change this so this thing persists here. So if you're interested in checking everybody out over there, Change Fusion, go to change-fusion.com or scan the QR code. Go ahead. Good luck clicking that QR code. See how far you get.
Not working on my end.
Yeah, me neither. Sean, anything you want to add here before we?
No, I'm really glad, Mark, that you reached out and connected. I implore everyone, be part of the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to understand what's driving your day-to-day. And transformation is a team effort. And we'd love to hear your perspective.
Absolutely. Well, we are also available at transformationleaderspodcast.com. Just like Mark did and his team, reach out to us if you've got something that you want to contribute to the conversation. We're here every Wednesday at 12 o'clock noon Eastern Standard Time. That's all the time we have for this week. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Sean. We'll see you all next time. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.